opening remark, and that sort of set up the order of the speakers. As the audience is trickling in, let me start in about 5-10 seconds. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Happy New Year. I hope all of you have a chance to relax and enjoy the holiday season and are fully energized to start the new year. Welcome to the APA Justice January monthly meeting. My name is Jeremy Wu. I thank all of you for speaking and joining us in today's meeting. I'll be moderating today's meeting with a lot of help from Vincent Wang and Professor Stephen Pei. My role is to keep the meeting on schedule, facilitate Q&A, and transition from speaker to speaker and from topic to topic. We're scheduled to end the meeting at around 3 p.m. Eastern Time today. We'll cover all the speakers on the agenda to be followed by a Q&A and discussion session. To stay on time, I may be rude and apologize in advance if I must interrupt because the allotted time is running out. APA Justice monthly meetings are by invitation only. Today's meeting will be recorded so that we can prepare a written summary of the meeting. It'll be posted at apajustice.org after the speakers have a chance to review it. Otherwise, the monthly meeting is off record. The video will be posted only with explicit permission by the speakers. For the audience, please raise your questions or comments using the Q&A feature on your Zoom screen. We'll try to address them during or after the meeting. We're honored to have Congresswoman Judy Chu to speak to us and kick off the new year today. APA Justice was formed in 2015 in response to her call to create a platform to connect CAPAC elected officials with concerned organizations and individuals to address racial profiling and related fairness and justice issues for the Asian Pacific American communities. Congressman Judy Chu represents California's 28th Congressional District. She has been a congressional member since 2009 and chair of CAPAC since 2011. She'll give us her review of 2023 and a look ahead in 2024. We're thankful that Hongwei, Taipei, and ECHO will follow Judy to report on the Justice for All protests in Miami, Florida on December 16. It was an inspiring to close 2023 and start the new year. Judy and many others braved the stormy day with strong winds and heavy rain to protest the Florida alien land law and other discriminatory state laws in a strong show of unity and protection of our constitutional and civil rights. We look forward to your reports. Ted Gong will introduce the 1882 project that eventually became the 1882 Foundation and its upcoming activities in 2024. The 1882 project included the passing of House and Senate resolutions that express regret on the Chinese Exclusion Act in 2011 and 2012, respectively. The House version was sponsored by Congresswoman Chu. We commemorated the 80th anniversary of the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act last month. The White House issued an unprecedented statement on the occasion. APA Justice plans to work with Ted, Judy, and others on a short series of webinars related to the past lessons and possible future versions of the Chinese Exclusion Act. It will likely include Marty Goh, pro bono counsel for the 1882 project. He wrote a landmark book titled Forbidden Citizens, Chinese Exclusion, and the U.S. Congress to provide a comprehensive legislative history behind the Chinese Exclusion Act. We hope that his insights will be part of the upcoming webinars. Stephen, Vincent, and I will fly to Atlanta right after today's meeting to attend the Carter Center Conference for the 45th anniversary of U.S.-China relations. We're privileged to have Dr. Yawei Liu, Senior Advisor for China Focus at the Carter Center, and he will introduce us to the Carter Center and the conference. We welcome our regular speaker, Joanna Durman, who will give us an update from Advancing Justice, AHAC. We also welcome Ari Andriola, Associate Director of Policy and Litigation for the Asian American Scholar Forum, to report on AASF activities. Ari will substitute for Gisela, who's on leave and travel today. So I warmly welcome all the speakers and audience and participants in today's meeting. Are there any questions or matter that we need to address before we start the meeting? And let me at this point welcome Congresswoman Judy Chu to start today's meeting. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me here today to kick off this new year with you. I tell you, it's so great to be here speaking to all of you, because it was back in 2015 when we were hearing reports of racial bias and profiling of Asian Americans, often specifically Chinese scientists, researchers, and engineers. I put out a call to the community to mobilize and organize around this issue as the chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, or what we call CAPAC. And I'm proud to see the result of that call for community support is indeed the APA Justice Task Force. There has never been a more important time for you to be in existence. When this community began to form in 2015, back when Sherry Chen and Dr. Xiaosheng Qi's cases became public, we never knew how large of a problem targeting our communities would become and what new struggles we would face. But thanks to your leadership, the Asian American scientific and academic community's voices are louder than ever before. And more people are aware of the blatant racial profiling that our communities have faced at the hands of our own government. I want to thank each of you for your engagement on such important issues like this, because together we have accomplished some major wins in the last year. So today, it is my honor to join you and share what we have been able to do thanks to your dedicated advocacy and to the work of APA Justice's leaders, including Jeremy Wu, Stephen Pei, and Vincent Wang. One of the most pressing issues last year was the surge in legislation seeking to restrict land ownership for Chinese and other immigrant communities across various states and in Congress. When APA Justice, AAPI advocates, and CAPAC members, Representatives Lizzie Fletcher and Al Green, brought attention to such a bill in Texas early last year, I was immediately alarmed. Texas Senate Bill 147 would ban citizens and companies from China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia from buying land in Texas. But because of Texas State Representative Gene Wu and so many AAPI groups and activists working tirelessly on the ground in Texas to speak out against this legislation, this bill did not move forward into law. But in other states like Alabama, Louisiana, and Florida, these types of bills were signed into law. Already, realtors have reported experiencing business losses and feeling compelled to comply with the new alien land laws in unrealistic, uncomfortable ways, forcing them to act like proxy ICE agents and question people's nationalities. And families are being hurt. Longtime Florida resident Kristen Zhang was thrilled when, after being separated during the pandemic, her parents decided to buy a home in Florida. Those plans have been canceled simply because her parents are from China. Or how about Mr. Zhimingzhu, a political asylee living in Florida who was persecuted by the Chinese government and had to flee to the US, where he's lived for the past 4 years. Because of the new Florida land law, Mr. Xu was forced to cancel the contract for the purchase of what was supposed to be his new home. And as a result, he lost both his property and his $30,000 deposit. And in Florida, Chinese nationals who own property are now required to register their properties with the state. In fact, last month, I joined AAPI advocates in Miami, Florida to speak out strongly and loudly against these discriminatory and racist attacks, which certainly do nothing to help in national security. This is why I recently joined Congressmember Al Green to introduce a bill, the Preemption of Real Property Discrimination Act, prohibiting such state laws from taking effect. We have to do everything we can to push this bill forward. Now, at the federal level, we've seen these measures introduced and attached to legislative vehicles. When the Senate considered the National Defense Authorization Act, such an amendment had passed. Immediately afterwards, CAPAC and a coalition of AANHP organizations, including many of you on this call, reached out to congressional leadership and committees to express our grave concerns and demand that it be kept out of the final text. I am thrilled to share that with your help, we successfully pushed to remove the harmful language from the final version of the National Defense Authorization Act, which the president ultimately signed. Not only that, we also worked to strike provisions that parroted xenophobic COVID-19 conspiracy theories. And we successfully pushed back measures that would harm the Asian American research community and hinder international collaboration and U.S. innovation, such as a House provision that would have established problematic disclosure requirements for university researchers to have, including their personal information, their date of birth, immigration status, and that all this be published publicly online. So as we continue this work to protect the civil rights of our community, we must also ensure that our community's resilient history is recognized, celebrated, and preserved. In 2010, just after I was elected to Congress, Chinese American community organizations began reaching out to me about ways we could work to promote equality and justice. Many advocates started with addressing the history of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. This act is among the most discriminatory laws ever passed by Congress. It remains the only law to name an ethnic group for exclusion from immigration and prohibited Chinese Americans from becoming naturalized citizens so that they could not vote. It required Chinese people to carry papers on them at all times or else be subject to deportation, and only the testimony of a white person could save them. This law deprived the Chinese community of their civil rights for 60 years, yet the U.S. had never apologized for it. So for 2 years, together we worked to build support for a formal apology, including educating many of my colleagues in Congress, most of whom had never even heard of this law. And finally, in 2011 and 2012, the U.S. Senate and then the House unanimously passed my bill officially expressing regret for the Chinese Exclusion Act. Last month, I introduced the official congressional resolution to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act. As the first Chinese American woman ever elected to Congress, it's critical that I use my seat at that table to ensure that our history is remembered and that nothing like this could ever happen to our communities again. In closing, I want to underscore how important groups like APA Justice are in making all of these major achievements happen over the past year. In the year ahead, we know the work continues to proactively engage with our partners in the administration, across federal agencies, and my fellow members of Congress, and to ensure that our communities are not facing anti-Asian discrimination and racial profiling. To that end, CAPAC will continue to prioritize calling out blatantly xenophobic, anti-China rhetoric, pushing back on policies that unfairly target Chinese American and other AA and HPI communities, and advocating for common sense measures that would address racial discrimination and profiling, like FISA Section 702 reform that will stop this warrantless surveillance that's been going on since 9/11. So thank you again for inviting me today to join your monthly call. I appreciate the leadership this group has taken when the need arose for our community to mobilize years ago. And while it's unfortunate that those needs have continued to grow, I'm so grateful to know that a group like APA Justice Task Force is leading the way in bringing our community and our allies together to stand up for our civil rights. I appreciate your inclusion of KPAC in your monthly calls and your long-standing partnership with us. I am thrilled to start this year by congratulating you all on the hard work that you have done on behalf of our community. I encourage you to stay strong on the road ahead as we work together this year, speaking out for those being targeted just for being Chinese or Asian American, and continue building this diverse coalition of leaders across the country. I look forward to working with you to make this nation more inclusive of all people, where no one should be made to feel unsafe or un-American because of who they are. And I will continue to strive for an America where everybody is treated equally. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Chu. Thank you very much for your review of 2023 and inspiring remarks for the new year, and your continuing public service for not just the Asian American community, but all Americans in the country. We look forward to working closely with you, Nisha, Casey, and more recently, Amy, and KPAC, to both celebrate our successes as well as to meet the challenges in the new year. Month to month, Nisha and Casey are doing a great job keeping the communities informed and involved. So I hope you can stay as long as you can for the rest of the meeting. Or the other speakers, in one way or another, touches on activities that you and KPAC are doing. Hongwei, Haipei, and Echo, I understand Echo may have to leave, so primarily Hongwei and Haipei, would you take the floor next for up to 10 minutes in total and give us a report on the Miami event that Congresswoman Chu just mentioned?
Why don't we go ahead first?
Okay, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Hongwei Shang, and thank you for having me. I'm a co-founder and the vice president of Florida Asian American Justice Alliance, FAJA. FAJA was formed in April 2023 in response to the notorious SB 264 interests of foreign countries. During the past 8 months, FAJA grew significantly, especially during the last month of 2023, where we organized the December 16th rally against SB 264. We initially only had several $1,000s from board membership fees and donations. And we started to do fundraising in December while promoting the December 16th rally, and successfully raised around $86,000 overall to date. Our membership also grew from around 200 people to nearly 500. Our members include people who had never heard about us before the rally, even including people from other states. Through organizing this rally, people got to know FAJA better, and some even became strong supporters of us. As to the rally itself, the success depended on the support of many local community leaders. As soon as we first discussed the possibility of such a rally in Miami, I put a group of local key organizers and had our first meeting in my office. 15 people appeared in person and 3 attended by Zoom. We discussed how to effectively organize the rally and divided tasks quickly, including who would be responsible for applying for permits, renting a DJ system and a tent, finding a place for people to rest after the rally, designing slogans and flyers, working on press releases, leading people to shout slogans, inviting people to attend, setting up the tent, and bringing in snacks and drinks, and maintaining security and orders, etc. We also got several local news media to support us, including North American Economic Herald, Miami Chinese TV, and United Chinese News. Sinovision.net and CBS also sent people over to cover our rally. More importantly, our event flyers and rally reports were published by North American Economic Herald in their media network and were later reprinted by around 150 news media throughout the United States. The December 16th was a stormy day, but we still had a good turnout. Around 200 people showed up. More could have come if it were not for the weather. That said, the rally became a historical event because of the weather, and even became the theme of our fight against SB 264. It gave us a glimpse of hope that after the storm, there would be sunshine. After the rally, many people expressed in our rally WeChat groups that the protest left them with unforgettable memories, and some even took home our yellow ponchos as souvenirs of the event. One of the songs we sang, "We Shall Overcome," also became the constant talking points by the attendees and various news media. We especially want to thank UCA and HiPay for helping us with the fight against SB 264 and co-organizing the event with us. Because of UCA's help, we got many keynote speakers, including Congress Lady Judy Chu, former presidential candidate Andrew Yang, Texas House Representative Jim Wu, Attorney Clay Zhu, as well as representatives from such national organizations as NAACP, LULAC, and AREA. Our rally garnered support from not only Asian Americans, but Hispanic, Latin American, Black, and Jewish communities. Overall, 28 organizations supported our rally. This event was a collaborative effort of all. In 2024, FADA will seek collaborations with UCA and other organizations to continue our fight against injustice to the AAPI community. We have made our plans for the new year and believe that we will grow stronger and get more supports from people who have the same vision of justice for all as us. If anyone is interested in knowing more about FADA, please visit our website, fada.com. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. I'll just pick up where Sean has left. I really truly want to thank Congressman Judy Chu for going to Miami. I really want to say this, that when I approached her, she didn't ask anything else. She replied to me right away saying that if I can put my already scheduled events off, I will come. So and so is Jing Wu, and so is Andrew, and this protest will become a legend in a big. It's not just rain; it's in a big storm. And as Hongwei said very poetically, it is a symbolize our journeys ahead. That we were going to face a lot of more storms like we had, but we believe the justice and equality of this country and what this Constitution has promised all of us. Now, we are very proud to say that that protest is attended by in my words, 4 major minorities: African Americans, Latinos, Asians, and our Jewish brothers and sisters. And I think that's a good model to move forward, as the Chinese community is very small and vulnerable and are not used to political engagement or civic engagement. For the 20 years ahead, we think that since our civil rights will be challenged and sometimes may be compromised, as we have seen in all those criminal indictment of Chinese American scientists. We really think for the 10 or 20 years ahead, not just because of bad US-China relations, but also equally worried and concerned about the political extremism in our country on both sides. I think the Chinese community is caught in the middle. And because of that, and of course, the bad US-China relations, our community is going to face a tough time ahead. And for that, UCA has started to talk with our communities and trying to launch something called a civil rights movement of our time. I checked about this theme with Martin Luther King's son, Malcolm X's daughter, and others, and they all like it. After all these years, and with this new civil rights challenge in the future, we do think it's time that Chinese community have a serious conversation and to see whether we could really help launch a civil rights movement of our time. Now, to be specific, I really think that I want to say that thanks to Governor DeSantis, he has given our community two good gifts. One gift is what we talked about here today, SB 264, and another one that less talked about one is the academic one. It's called SB 486, which basically stopped any public universities academic exchange with China in its track. And also that bill banned Florida Public University from hiring any Chinese student from China together with students from 7 other countries. Something, both of these bills, it's something our country has written down to registered private citizen property and to ban foreign students from a class of countries from being hired at public universities. Something absolutely on the state level, I think is the very first. Anyway, I think history will judge on that, have a better judgment on that. And I'm confident with your help, with all of our help. And please do remember, many years ago, it is at this forum, we started talking about not just criticize China initiative, but little by little, we're talking about terminate that. And 3 years after our little talk here and there and everywhere, that has become a fact. I think the same thing absolutely will happen to Florida. I do believe in my bone that that too vicious, evil law will be repealed. And then we will have our sunshines again. Thank you.
Thank you, Hongwei and Haipei. That sort of leads us right into Ted and Marty. Chinese American, Asian American communities have faced lots of up and downs almost since the beginning of the nation, the United States as a nation. And Ted, you play a big role along with a few other organizations with the 1882 Project and now the 1882 Foundation. Would you lead us off on the activities of the project and the foundation?
Sure, thank you. Thank you very much. I want to thank Steve and Jeremy and Vincent for always being here supportive of us. I want to go over, also, I want to express an appreciation for what Haipei said, which is basically that when we talk about immigration and the rights to become citizens and so forth, it is very much part of the civil rights movement. I don't think that the 65 Act, which is the critical act that actually equalized immigration processes, is could not have happened without the '64 Immigration Equal Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. There are three of the same sort of movement that happened, and so to have it again, to think in terms of civil rights movement of our times, is actually finishing the messages and messages and ideas that we want to talk about. Martin will talk more about what we plan to do very specifically. He's been such a great friend and a great and a scholar for what we have done and are keep trying to do. I want to talk about three type of approaches here. Or I want about three topics. One is very quickly, I'll just give you a rundown of what the 1882 Foundation is, what it's trying to do, and what we have planned for the next year, what we hope are the larger messages that we want. And then later on, the fourth thing is probably to get together with Martin and say, let's promise a series of immigration talks that we would do the next year. Jeremy and Martin and us would try to get this together. First, the 1882 Foundation began almost 12 years ago. As Judy was talking about, Judy Chu, could not have happened without her support and also Scott Brown's support. So in those period, we introduced the resolutions that, as Judy Chu mentioned, were passed.
Ted, you were muted. You're muted. Would you unmute yourself?
Okay, here we are back again. In any case, 2011, 2012, we passed those resolutions. And one of the important things about the resolutions was not just to get Congress to express regret for what they did. It was also a promise in some of in the language of the legislation that it was their responsibility. They had to reaffirm the responsibility that they had a right, they had an obligation to protect the rights of all people in the United States. So we formed the 1882 Foundation as an educational foundation after that message was passed. And we have three types of programming initiatives. One is to preserve and protect oral histories and sites. And another one is to work with school systems and school districts on producing lesson plans and curriculum development. And the third one is to work with different museums and public educators to talk about best practices, how we talk about how we can spread the word about the and the meaning of the Immigration Act, of the 1882 Act, continuing significance. One of the things I want to point out is continuing significance. The fact that we apologize for it or we express regret for it did not remove it. We just had an event at the Library of Congress that celebrated the 80th anniversary of the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act. Martin gave an excellent lecture, like he always does, about the origins of the act. But one has to think that 80 years after the repeal, we still had to address issues such as anti-Asian hate and the continuation of those kind of problems. So that's an issue for us to continue to think about. What we want to do in the next year or so is that we have programs to establish a national monument at Summit Tunnel up in California. This is important for us to do, and we expect that nomination will be passed in spring or summer, or approved in the spring or summer of 2024. We have some other conferences that are going on and so forth. But it's important for us to remember that we need these type of monuments. We can have little temples assigned to be historical registered places and things, but to address this issue that Chinese Americans and Asian Americans are foreigners, we need to show to the country, and the country needs to acknowledge that there are national contributions that the Chinese Americans have made to the nation that requires or that actually makes the case that we also made this America. We're not just doing these actions or trying to do things because we want some kind of protection against things happening again. It is that we helped build this country, and we should have that acknowledged. So that's one of the things that we want to do. National monuments of the stature of the Summit Tunnel at California. Second thing is we need national heroes. We need to make sure that the people who fought in the various wars, such as anyone who fought Kurt Lee and so forth on the Korean War, get the national awards that recognize the fact that individuals also fought for this country and defended this country. So those are the things that we are trying to do in the next, and the next area that we're looking at is we want to do some specific things, which Martin and I and Jeremy have talked about, is we actually want to look at our history and the history of these laws and look at them very specifically. So often I see the discussion on immigration laws talking about very extreme things or things which are very general. What I like to do is start a series with Martin, and he give a baseline lecture of what the 1882 law was about. And in fact, that was probably our first comprehensive immigration law, and everything builds on top of that. And Martin could talk about that history. And then we want to get into specific laws, such as 245I or the 3 and 5 year bans, and talk about those type of issues, which we could probably address better than if we sort of talk about the extremes of they shall not come or they will come and not, and humanitarian issues. Those things prevent us from discussing immigration reform in a practical way. And so I think a series of information that talks about that, series of webinars that talk about very specific acts shown in history, how they came about, then how they act now, and what we can do to reform those are things that we want to do. It's interesting to me that in all the immigration debates, very few of them raise the examples of Chinese legal examples. Talk about Japanese internment and incarceration and such as that, but very few talk about the various laws that actually are directly related to some of the issues that are being discussed today. All right, so I want to leave a little bit of time for Martin to talk a bit more about these things, and I hope that I can have time to talk to you guys either at this session or in the sessions in the series of events that we plan. Martin?
Martin, unmute yourself.
Fortunately, we weren't muted when we were lobbying Congress. Anyway, thank you all. Jeremy and Ted and the rest of you, it's good to be with you. And I will say that I did work for the 1882 project when we were at Covington. I was at Covington and Burling back a decade ago. And it was a great joy and a great matter of professional fulfillment for me. We did it on a pro bono basis, and we're pleased to do so. And I am pleased now to continue to do this on behalf of the 1882 Foundation as we engage in continuing education. I just want to put a little perspective on what was done back in 2011 and 2012, just to give you a sense of it and why it's important that those resolutions not gather dust on the shelf, but be a point of ongoing education for the community and also for others. It's easy to focus on the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, and as Representative Chu said, one of the most discriminatory acts in American history. But I want to emphasize that that act did not stand alone. In fact, there were 8 separate enactments of Congress, 2 of which were vetoed, and 6 of which became public law. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 was the 3rd of those pieces of legislation after 2 vetoed measures, and it was followed by legislation in 1884, 1888, 1892, 1902, and 1904 made permanent. And it remained so until 1943, when the law was repealed in the middle of the Second World War as a war measure. Up until that point, no person of Chinese descent born anywhere in the world outside of China outside of the United States could become an American citizen, whether they were born in China or they were born in England or in France or anywhere in the world. It would not have made any difference. So the law was repealed in 1943. But again, as Ted mentioned, Congress sort of let that sit. And it wasn't until 2011 in the Senate and 2012 in the House that we were able to begin to make things right through these expressions of regret resolution. The resolution in the Senate passed by unanimous consent. The resolution in the House passed under suspension of the rules. Ted and I sat in the gallery that day in the House while Congresswoman Chu made her floor statement and the legislation went through. Judy Chu's leadership in this is obvious and crucial in terms of moving a resolution through the House. It simply would not have happened without her. I would add a word about the Senate resolution because it gets a bit less attention, but it's worthy of highlighting. The sponsor in the Senate, the prime sponsor, was Senator Scott Brown, a Republican from Massachusetts. So it is interesting to note that at the time of the sponsorship, as both resolutions went in the same day, May 26, 2011, the two prime sponsors were members of the minority party in their respective chambers. Now, how is it that Scott Brown got to be the sponsor in the Senate? Opposition to the Chinese exclusion laws in the Senate was centered primarily among the remnant of the Abraham Lincoln Republican Party that would be found in the northeastern United States. And one of the people who opposed the Chinese exclusion legislation throughout all of those enactments that I mentioned was a senator from Massachusetts named George Frisbee Hoar. He was a senator from 1877 until 1904, and upon his death in 1904. And so he got to see this entire history from the time that was controversial as it was originally until the time that there was no opposition, which was true by the end of this long and sorry story. In 1902, when the last major piece of Chinese exclusion legislation went through, it was a renewal and expansion of the old law. He waited until the end of the debate, and he was by then an elderly senator. And he finally stood up and said, my problem is basically not with the details of this legislation. My problem is with the principle of this legislation. I believe everybody should be treated equally. And as this legislation violates that principle, I am bound to record my protest if I stand alone. The bill passed 76-1. He stood alone. So I sat in Scott Brown's office, where he had pictures of former senators from Massachusetts, including George Frisbee Hoar. And I said to him, we need to get this resolution introduced. If you will stand in his shoes and in their shoes, we'll have a place to go. And he did not hesitate. He agreed to sponsor the resolution. Then Senator Feinstein of California came along as the first Democrat. And we began to accumulate co-sponsors. By the time we had got our original list, we had 6 Democrats and 5 Republicans. So that when we were able to move to the Senate floor on October the 6th, 2011, we had strong bipartisan support. We discharged the Senate Judiciary Committee, and we passed the legislation by unanimous consent. In the House, it came the following year. That's a foundation, and it builds upon a very long story that we will tell in education sessions. But again, it wouldn't have happened without people of goodwill like Scott Brown, and it wouldn't have happened without people of goodwill and leadership like Judy Chu of California. So that's what I'd like to say at the moment.
Thank you very much, Ted and Marty, and especially Marty on your story. It's one of the many, many nuggets that are not known, well known in American society. And I think you gave us a great teaser of the upcoming webinars and lecture that you and Ted will be putting together and will be gladly co-sponsoring them. So I hope that this is the start of a great collaboration in the coming year. And I thank you again from the bottom of my heart, Ted and Marty. At this point, let me turn to Dr. Liu, Yahweh Liu, and we do have to end the meeting on time today because all of us need to come to your conference. So tell us about your conference and the Carter Center.
Thanks, Jeremy, for the invitation. So I'll be as quick as I can. So the Carter Center was founded in 1982 after President Carter, in his own words, were involuntarily retired by the American people in 1981. So Carter Center's work in China started in the middle 1990s. President Carter was not able to visit China during his presidency because of the domestic and foreign crisis, but he was able to make the big decision to normalize the relationship with China after a very long and hard negotiation with his counterpart, Deng Xiaoping in China. Here in the US, but even more so in China, most experts and ordinary people give credit to Nixon and Kissinger for opening up to China. But Kissinger went to China in 1971, Nixon went to China in 1972, but President Carter and Deng Xiaoping made the joint decision to normalize the relationship in 1978. The communique was published on December the 15th, 1978, and diplomatic relations was normalized on January the 1st, 1979. So Deng Xiaoping told President Carter after he left the White House, visit China anytime you want. And during one of the visit, President Carter asked, we have a center. Does China need the center to work on any projects? And Deng Xiaoping referred the Carter Center to his paralyzed son, who is the president of the Chinese Association for the Disabled People. So that's the first project of the Carter Center in China, is to offer special ed training to the teachers who are teaching at the School for the Deaf. The Carter Center also purchased artificial limb production line from Germany for China. Starting in 1998, the center started monitoring village elections in China. That gradually became a project we call Promoting Political Reform in China. So it was launched in 1998, and it was terminated roughly around 2012. During President Carter's visit, the new leader, Xi Jinping, told President Carter, we will not allow the center to intervene, quote unquote, in domestic affairs of China. You're the president who normalized the relationship, so we would like you and the center to dedicate more time and more resources on the promotion of better understanding between the two countries and the two peoples, and to advance the bilateral relationship between the two countries. So that's when the center pivoted to promoting a better understanding between the two countries, as well as how to prevent really a conflict in the Pacific and in East Asia. So starting in December 2012, the inaugural Carter Center Forum on U.S.-China relations was opened in Beijing. So from 2012 to 2019, a total of 7 forums were held, and President Carter attended and spoke at 6 of them. So there was one forum that was held in Suzhou, China, in 2016, and President Carter was not able to travel to China at that time. So the pandemic in January 2019, on the occasion of the 40th anniversary of the normalization of U.S.-China relations, we had the forum here at the Carter Center from January the 17th through the 19th. By that time, the relationship was already in the downward spiral. The Carter Center was the only US-based organization that organized such a meeting to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the normalization of US-China relations. So the pandemic hit. So during the pandemic, we had forums virtually. So this is the first in-person forum on US-China relations after the pandemic held at the Carter Center. And this is also the first time we named the forum the Jimmy Carter Forum on US-China relations. We will have a large contingent of Chinese speakers from universities and think tanks. We'll have a large number of American experts. We also have subnational government representatives. We're also thrilled that Vincent, Jeremy, and Stephen will come to the center to attend the forum tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. So we are thrilled. Once again, we're the only US-based organization, at least for now, to have such a meeting. Because in the US, the atmosphere is such that most of the think tanks and the international NGOs are concerned if they're going to do something to commemorate the normalization of US-China relations, then you get perceived to be pro-China. So the Carter Center, the final words I will say here is in the US, we are criticized as being too pro-China because President Carter normalized the relationship. He really implemented Nixon's engagement policy. Because of that, we're being attacked by members of the congressional delegation from Georgia as being too soft on China, as well as colluding with the Chinese Communist Party. Now in China, we are not getting along very well with the Chinese government because they believe the Carter Center is trying to promote human rights in China. The Carter Center is trying to promote political reform in China. The Carter Center is accused of trying to sabotage the Chinese Communist Party's legitimacy and trying to overthrow the regime. So we are also blacklisted in China. But we do believe that we have a mission. That mission is, Americans need to have a more objective view of China, and the Chinese need to have a more informed perception of the United States, because misperception lead to miscalculation, and miscalculation lead to wrong decisions that can easily lead to a conflict between these two countries. So one of the missions of the Carter Center is waging peace. And the most important mission for China focus at the Carter Center is to wage peace between the two countries through better understanding of each other, through communicating with each other, through recommendations on mechanisms through which the relationship can be stabilized. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Yahweh, for that presentation. Let me at this point pivot to Joanna. Thank you for being so patient. Would you give us an update from Advancing Justice AJC?
Yes, of course. Thank you so much. As always, really appreciate APA Justice for convening us all here. Just a few updates from AJC on our ongoing priorities and upcoming events. Number one, as Representative Chu already mentioned, we're very happy to uplift the fact that the discriminatory rounds amendment was stripped from the final version of the NDAA. As everyone here already knows, if enacted, the Rounds Amendment would have effectively prohibited foreign citizens, including Chinese foreign citizens, from purchasing various forms of U.S. land. And it would have been very much in line with the resurgence of so-called alien land laws that we're seeing at a state level. So we're very happy to see that, our collective advocacy paid off in that regard, and that it was not included in the defense bill for FY24, which Biden did sign into law last month. So thank you to all who supported those efforts, especially our Hill allies, many of whom are already on this call. Speaking of the NDAA, I know that many of the groups here are also deeply invested in reforming FISA Section 702. The big news in this space is that a 4-month extension of 702 was included in the NDAA. And what this means for us functionally is that we have a bit of a longer runway to do advocacy and education around the merits of the House Judiciary Committee FISA reform bill, which AJC supports. So in that respect, we definitely look forward to working with you all to ensure the strongest and most reform-minded piece of FISA legislation, ensuring that receives floor consideration, probably sometime, if I had to read the tea leaves later this month, or more likely in February. And then finally, for the sake of time, I'll condense this update down and only include a flag from my immigration team, which is that senators on both sides of the aisle are considering extreme permanent changes to U.S. immigration law in exchange for Ukraine aid. These harmful immigration policy proposals include gutting our asylum system, locking up more immigrants and families in detention, and expedited removals that would endanger undocumented people across the country. If passed, this would be devastating for our communities, Asian migrants, undocumented Asian Americans, and mixed status families. In response, AJC is helping to organize a #SaveAsylum rally tomorrow, Tuesday, January 9th, starting at 12. A lot of this information is probably already in your inboxes, but I'll be sure to forward it along again to Jeremy so that he can uplift this, hopefully after the call. But as a preview, folks will be gathering at the Lutheran Church of the Reformation, which is near the Supreme Court. And immediately following the rally's completion, we will then break up into groups to walk to nearby Senate buildings in order to lobby senators. So please reach out with any further questions. I'd be happy to put you in touch with our immigration team. And if you are in the DC area, be sure to bring an umbrella or a raincoat, and hopefully see you there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joanna. And Ari, would you take the floor to give us an update on AASF?
Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here with you all today. On behalf of AASF, I wanted to provide the following top updates. So first, AASF is monitoring the impacts of Florida's SB 846 that Haipe mentioned earlier. So this law restricts Florida's public colleges and universities from hiring researchers and graduate assistants from several, quote, countries of concern, which include China and Iran. As we are looking to learn more about the impact of this law, we ask that any scholars or students who are affected by this reach out to us at AASF. So I think we have shared mine and Gisela's contact information in the chat. Thank you so much, Jeremy. So a little bit more on this law. Florida's SB 846 restricts grants and partnerships, collaborating on research projects, as well as sharing research data with individuals and entities from the 7 countries of concern without prior approval. To get approval, educational institutions are required to submit a form to the State Board of Governors, who then determine whether the partnership or agreement is considered to be valuable to the students and the institution and not detrimental to the safety or security of the United States or its residents. And according to the guidance that's implementing the law, it doesn't apply to student enrollment, but there are a significant share of international graduate students from China and Iran at Florida's public universities, such as the University of Florida. And this is, yet another attempt to scapegoat Asian Americans and Chinese American immigrants in particular as, national security threats and appearing tough on China. The bill would chill research collaboration and open science, and ASF is monitoring the impacts of this law and in the process of creating some resources as a brief explainer for the community. I think we have lifted up a New York Times article that Gisela recently spoke with the Times on this issue to learn more. Thank you, Jeremy. And then during last month's meeting, ASF listed up a sign-on opportunity for a letter we led with coalition partners to Congress on opposing language to reinstate the DOJ's China initiative in a House appropriations bill and any future iterations of the initiative. With many thanks, 48 organizations joined the letter, and we submitted the letter on December 7th. The letter highlighted the lasting harms to scholars targeted, as well as the chilling effect on the Asian American scholars and their leadership in science and technology. And thank you again for everyone who joined this letter and showed strong support. And lastly, very briefly, I wanted to thank APA Justice for co-hosting a community briefing webinar on Section 702 on December 12th. We had Joanna, as well as other panelists join us for that webinar, and I believe that discussion is available online. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ari. We have now reached the point of Q&A and discussion session. Are there any questions for the speakers or among the speakers today for each other that would open up the session? Let me raise this question to Ted and Martin. As we go back to 1882, and then today we hear quite a bit about the alien land laws and the fear of the revival of the Chinese Exclusion Act. And then I think among some, I'm not sure whether it's realistic or feasible, but there is that fear that even internment, perhaps not physical, but virtual internment may be possible. Do you have any thoughts in relating what has happened in the past to what may happen in the future or the present?
You know, though, just to take a quick stab at it, I think that one of the things we look at, we always talk about the immigration laws and how we keep people out and what the visa laws are about. But I think one of the most serious things to really look about is the question of birthright citizenship. We assume, and everybody sort of takes the stance that it is in the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, and that's unassailable. But I don't think it is, actually. The original decision that allowed, the original decision in Wong Kee Park that allowed it to become the law, birthright citizenship, was actually a split decision, right? And so it's possible to me that if the legislature put in some laws that actually made it birthright citizen questionable based upon and you needed to have say your parents had to have green cards or you had to have other status and so forth, then that law will be immediately challenged, taken to the Supreme Court, and the question is, will the Supreme Court reaffirm that original decision? And I'm not sure that is something you really ought to take for granted. And we need to understand why that birthright citizenship is so important for America, especially since if you look at all the countries around the world, the United States is actually an outlier in saying that birthright citizenship actually exists, that right exists. Very few modern countries have that provision. So I think that we really ought to look very closely at all these efforts to question the right of the birthright citizenship.
Ted, on this point, in 1902, when the last major Chinese exclusion legislation passed, the House of Representatives actually had a provision that it passed that would have contradicted the Supreme Court's decision in the Wong Kim Ark case and forced the court once again to decide whether or not birthright citizenship was what the court said it was in the Wong Kim Ark case. The prime sponsor of that provision was a representative from Missouri named Champ Clark, who later became the Speaker of the House. And at the time, he was challenged on the floor, and he was told, well, this provision contradicts the Supreme Court's decision. And he said, I know it does. I think the court decided the case wrongly, and I want to give them a chance to decide it again. If that legislation, so the House passed the provision, the Senate did not agree, and it did not ultimately become public law. But suppose it had. Then you might have had an immediate challenge to Wong Kim Ark, all the way back at the beginning of the 20th century. And there are people today who want to pass legislation that basically statutorily says birthright citizenship does not mean this or does not mean this, and then get the court to once again interpret the 14th Amendment. So what this birthright citizenship rests on is the 14th Amendment and the court's interpretation of the 14th Amendment. And Congress has in the past come close to challenging that interpretation, or at least to creating a circumstance where there can be litigation to challenge that interpretation. And it certainly could happen again.
Yes, yes. And it's a position that was advocated as early as the last effort to make immigration reform. And that was by Democrats, actually, saying that they were ready to get almost to reconsider birthright citizenship if liberal immigration rules, especially sort of like giving status to the various people, the people that live in the United States. That was actually put forth by Gutierrez.
Not to prolong this, but if you want to take an originalist approach,
Yeah.
which came up in the House debate in 1902, the argument was made, well, what they really meant was just to make citizens out of the people who had been slaves who were born in the United States, and it didn't mean anything more than that.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, under that interpretation, it wouldn't have applied to Wong Kim Ark. So again, it's in the Constitution, but what it means is subject to court interpretation.
Thank you, Ted and Marty. There is a follow-up question from the audience from Min Fan. One of her questions is, given Marty's expertise, what does he think of the federal versus state stance and actions as related to China? Is there some legal precedent to help states navigate through this gray area? I see Maine is elevated, and you can probably ask the question directly, but that's something that I read from you.
Thank you. So Marty, what we are seeing is, for example, a governor of California visited China.
Right.
And soon after, we brought a group of heartland mayors whose governor would really not go. So there's a question about how does the state navigate if the federal has a certain stance, that the state, for example, the alien law, and Judy is trying to say this is out of the hands of the state. Is there a legal precedent, or this is a gray area where state can have its own foreign policy to some extent?
It's a gray area in certain respects. Look, for example, the reason that Congress got into Chinese exclusion legislation in the first place was because an effort by California, which is where all of this germinated, right? An effort by California to restrict immigration was successfully challenged in the United States Supreme Court on the basis that immigration, which was the issue there, was exclusively a federal responsibility and not a state responsibility. The operative word there is exclusively. Right? And the conduct of foreign policy is also a federal responsibility, but does not mean, for example, that states might not enact land legislation that somebody may say is within their own jurisdiction. Right? Some people will say, well, that's a federal matter, but some people will say, well, that's a state matter. In other words, when I say it's a gray area, there are things that states can do that will have a bearing on bilateral relationship, for example, right? But are still within their authority to do. And states have been involved in foreign policy stuff or matters that relate to foreign policy and economic policy for a long time. There have been states that have established, plenty of them, majority of states have established offices in China to promote economic relations. States were particularly before COVID, how many missions went to China led by governors and mayors and so forth, seeking Chinese investment, foreign direct investment in the state, right? So it's a gray area because there are matters that are exclusively federal, but there are matters that are not exclusively federal where the state can take action that has a bearing on U.S. policy, but also is within their legal authority.
If I may, one more last question. Where does the DOJ oversight come in? Because one of the reasons some of the elected officials hesitant to visit China from our outreach is they don't want to get bothered by FBI, who are very curious about anyone wanting to visit China. Is this something that where legally the DOJ and the Department of State actually tangle over?
The FBI has had a long-standing interest in these kinds of things. Let me tell you what I'm talking about here. And again, this is not a complete answer to your question. It is not, but I'll give you an example. For a period of about 10 years, I assisted in organizing delegations of former members of the U.S. Senate and U.S. House, former members of the U.S. Senate and U.S. House, to visit China. And when those members would return to the United States, not every, but a number of them were contacted by the FBI, wanting to get some insight into what was discussed in the meetings in China and to what degree the Chinese government was attempting to continue to contact or to use people, right, for their own purposes. So it is a matter on which the FBI has had a very active interest with all kinds of high-profile people who have gone to China. Now I'll mention something else to you. I can remember hearing remarks from former U.S. ambassador to China, John Huntsman, who was also a former governor, who advised the Chinese that if they wanted to build political relationships in the United States, it would be easier to build them with governors and lieutenant governors and mayors, state legislators, than it would be to build them in Congress. And that advice is something that the Chinese pay a great deal of attention to. And when relations in Washington have seemed quite frozen or very chilly, certainly, for example, I don't know about this ambassador, but the ambassador just before him, Qin Gang, had very difficult time getting meetings on Capitol Hill. That's exactly what he did. Went out to the States and talked about interests out there because the interests were different. In other words, in Washington, you're more or less getting at a national security discussion. In Missouri, you're going to get a discussion about economic development and foreign direct investment. So the focus tends to be different and so forth. And the hostility or the openness to China has a lot to do with what the focus is of the meeting, right? So in essence, on a national security basis, the relationship could be chilly. On an economic basis, the relationship could be warmer. And that's what Huntsman imagined when he advised China to seek to develop relationships at that level. And that, I think, is what has happened on relationships built at that level. But here again, there are divisions between federal and state authority, but not bright lines when it comes to this stuff.
Thank you very much. I don't have any more questions.
Stephen, you elevated the Lorraine. Does she have a question? Lorraine, do you have a question?
I did not elevate it.
Okay. Well, we are about 13 minutes past 3, which is our scheduled closing time. So at this point, let me mention that our next meeting is scheduled for Monday, February 5th, 2024. And February 10th is the New Year's Day on the lunar calendar. It will be the year of the dragon. So it will be a year of energy and good results, no doubt, as every year is. So with this, I'll ask for any last comments, quick comments. Otherwise, we're heading to the airport and to see Atlanta and Yahweh.
Oh,
So,
it's Lorraine. I was able to unmute. Can you hear me? Lorraine Tong.
do you have a
Yes,
short?
we hear you now.
Oh, great. This is Lorraine Tong. I worked for Senator Cranston, Alan Cranston, and Jacob Javits. And I worked on the U.S.-China normalization process. And I knew, I met Marty probably 40 years ago.
Hello, Lorraine.
Hello. There's just no end to your talents and knowledge. I had no idea that you had all this expertise on the Chinese Exclusionary Act. So thank you, everyone. Jeremy, thanks so much for accepting me to continue to be in this forum. And, if there's any way I can help. You know that the resources at the Library of Congress Law Library is for everyone to use. So
Right.
you need something from them, I highly recommend it. I'm at the library, but I work exclusively for members of Congress. So of course, as an immigrant, naturalized many, many years ago, I continue to be engaged, of course, with all these issues. So thanks again for forming APA Justice and all the work that you do. This has been very educational.
Thank you, Lorraine. And thank you for the offer. Guess what? We're going to pick it up.
Okay.
When
If
you're
I
there.
don't know, I know where to go. And Marty, I'll follow up with you because I contacted you two weeks ago and I haven't been able to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine.
Lorraine, are you at the Library of Congress?
I am. I'm at the Congressional Research Service. And
Okay.
are you all familiar with the APA book that the House Historicals office in the House has put out back in about 2017? Are you familiar with that? It's the whole history of APAs and Pacific Islanders from the beginning, all the elected, including resident commissioners. So if you don't know that, why don't I give it to you later, Jeremy, so you can share it with everyone?
Yes, and we can put it up on the newsletter. Yes.
Yeah, and there's a discussion, of course, in there about the Chinese Exclusionary Act. There are 3 essays chronicling the 3 phases of APAs coming to the United States. And it comes all the way to the present with a profile on each Asian Pacific American that has been elected to Congress or served in Congress. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And with nothing else, going once, going twice, we adjourn. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeremy.